Welcome to Vietnamese Case Files. Today, we will revisit a series of shocking drug cases involving people of Vietnamese descent around the world, from hidden kingpins running trafficking networks on the dark web to cross-border smuggling operations moving hundreds of kilograms of illegal substances. We will also witness the tragic downward spiral of promising students in California and international students in Australia who turned gummy candy into a tool for distributing illegal drugs in schools. These cases not only reveal the close cooperation between law enforcement agencies in countries such as the United States, Vietnam, Australia, and Singapore, but also serve as a stark warning about the heavy price of chasing illegal wealth. Some individuals ended up facing the death penalty, leaving behind immeasurable grief for their families and deep regret for futures that once held great promise. Join Vietnamese Case Files as we dive deeper into the details to better understand the dark side of the criminal underworld and the costly lessons behind each sentence. And if you enjoy investigative true crime content and want to follow along with Vietnamese Case Files and upcoming cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Now, let's begin. On the afternoon of December 12, 2002, Gate C-22 of Changi Airport's Terminal 1 remained as lively as usual. Among the passengers was a young Asian-faced man making a transit stop before boarding Qantas flight QF10 to Melbourne, scheduled to depart at 8:15 p.m. As he passed through the security checkpoint at around 7:45 p.m., the alarm suddenly went off. A female security officer approached with a handheld scanner, sweeping it across his body but finding no metal object. However, when she touched the lower back of the passenger, she immediately felt an unusual bulge beneath his clothing. Remaining calm, she asked, "What is this?" The passenger, visibly startled, shook his head and said, "No." Sensing clear suspicion, the security team escorted the man to an inspection room and confiscated his backpack and carry-on bag. Inside the private screening room, a male officer instructed Van to raise his hands against the wall for a body check. Surprisingly, he did not resist, he fully cooperated. He slowly lifted his shirt and turned around, revealing a large plastic bundle tightly wrapped with yellow and white tape strapped to his lower back. When asked, "What is this?" the man bowed his head and admitted, "Heroin, sir." Moments later, he burst into tears and attempted to bang his head against the wall in panic. Officers tried to help him calm down. A few minutes later, once he regained control, one officer asked whether he had anything else in his luggage. Without hesitation, the man said yes, retrieved another plastic bundle from his backpack, and handed it over. His cooperation left officers both stunned and somewhat sympathetic toward his unusual behavior. Unlike many hardened traffickers, this young man, after his initial panic, voluntarily surrendered all contraband. Immediately after, airport security notified the Airport Drug Enforcement Team of Singapore's Central Narcotics Bureau, CNB. CNB officers arrived at 9:10 p.m. and took over the scene and evidence. The two powder-filled bundles were sealed and sent for analysis. Each one measured around 3 to 4 centimeters thick, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and tightly sealed with yellow tape. Laboratory analysis revealed that the packages contained a total of 396.2 grams of pure heroin, about 151.5 grams in the bundle taped to his back, and 244.7 grams in the bundle inside the backpack. Although this amount was roughly equivalent to the weight of a single soda can, it could produce 26,000 doses of illegal drugs, 26 times higher than Singapore's 15-gram threshold for the death penalty. With such a shocking discovery, the veteran officers at the airport knew the young man's legal fate was almost sealed. Yet his behavior puzzled them. Instead of denying his crime or attempting to conceal the evidence, he voluntarily surrendered the drugs and fully cooperated. He continued crying uncontrollably and fell into complete distress the moment he was arrested, showing none of the hardened traits of an experienced trafficker. Regardless, the criminal case was formally opened. The passenger was handcuffed and escorted to CNB headquarters at the Central Police Station for interrogation that same night. From the identification documents he carried, police learned that he was Nguyen Tuong Van, an Australian citizen of Vietnamese origin born in 1980 with no prior criminal history. Still, his motive and the circumstances leading to such a reckless act remained a major question, much like the mystery behind the two taped bundles of white powder seized from him. At the station, when officers examined Van's backpack and bag, they found a stash of items, including 9 counterfeit wristwatches, mimicking luxury brands, and 10 brand new leather belts. Van explained that these were souvenirs he had bought in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, to give to friends as Christmas gifts. He also carried 2 mobile phones, a Nokia and a Siemens, along with a Sony laptop borrowed from a friend. On his person, police collected loose currency totaling roughly 100 Australian dollars, consisting of Cambodian, Vietnamese, Singaporean, Australian, and US money, likely leftover spending cash from his trip. Notably, in his wallet was a small slip of paper with a phone number in Australia beginning with +04, matching the number Van identified as belonging to the mastermind who had drawn him into the scheme. Investigators quickly traced Van's travel history. He had entered Singapore on December 6, 2002, on a flight from Phnom Penh and was scheduled to fly onward to Melbourne on December 12th. This meant Van had spent about a week in Cambodia. At the airport, he was alone, with no accomplice in sight. This raised 2 possibilities. Either Van was a lone courier working for an international smuggling network, or he was acting entirely on his own. Remaining cooperative, Van said that a man named Sun had contacted him by phone and hired him to take the packages to Melbourne. Remarkably, Van did not know who the recipient would be. Sun told him that the contact would recognize Van first and initiate the exchange using the phrase, "I like basketball." So, did Van know he was carrying illegal drugs? The answer was yes, though he said he could not distinguish the type because he had never used drugs himself. And the reason he became entangled in this scheme was heartbreaking. Van told investigators he had a twin brother named Nguyen in Melbourne, and it was Koa who pushed him into this desperate situation. More importantly, a few years earlier, Koa had faced criminal charges for drug possession and assault, leaving him with heavy legal fees and debts. Out of love for his brother, Van dropped out of university to work and pay for Koa's legal costs. But before the old debts were resolved, Koa accumulated new debts with organized crime, leading both brothers to be threatened by gangsters. Under that pressure, Van made the desperate decision to accept a drug courier job to earn money and save his brother. This information made even the most seasoned investigators pause, as it appeared that Nguyen Tuong Van was both a perpetrator and a victim, driven by love for his family and reckless desperation. Knowing Van's family was struggling financially, a man named Tan in Melbourne introduced him to a quick money job in November 2002. At first, Van did not know what the job was. He only vaguely heard that he would need to travel overseas. Later, in Sydney, a man named Sun made a direct offer to hire Van to transport heroin from Asia to Australia for a very large payout. Desperate and needing money to pay his brother's debts, Van agreed, unable to grasp the full consequences he would face. Sun then arranged Van's round-trip airfare from Australia to Cambodia, covered his hotel expenses, and gave him $1,000 up front as spending money. On December 3rd, 2002, Van departed Sydney, transited through Singapore, and flew to Phnom Penh. There, he received 2 packages of heroin, one strapped to his lower back and the other hidden in his backpack, before preparing to return to Australia via Singapore. Van admitted that he was terrified, but the traffickers had threatened to harm his family in Melbourne if he failed or ran off with the drugs. When arrested at Changi Airport, Van said he feared for his family's safety, yet also felt strangely relieved that he no longer had to continue committing the crime. These sincere statements offered the first glimpses of a young man trapped between debt, threats, and the lure of quick cash. However, confessions alone were insufficient. Police needed independent verification. Digital forensics experts were brought in to extract data from Van's 2 mobile phones and borrowed Sony laptop. The results showed that apart from a mysterious text, "checked out now," sent to Van on December 3rd, there was nothing suspicious. The number was traced to a prepaid Australian SIM, likely used and discarded by Sun, making it impossible to identify him. Singaporean police then worked with the Australian Federal Police to investigate the 2 figures known as Sun and Tan, but with such limited information, both remained ghost-like. Changi Airport's CCTV footage was reviewed and confirmed Van was traveling alone, with no escort or helper. This strengthened the theory that he was merely a lone courier. In Van's travel timeline, only one person had contact with him, his Singaporean friend, Nguyen, who met him during transit on December 3rd while Van was on his way to Cambodia. During questioning, Nguyen confirmed they only made casual conversation and that he knew nothing about the drug operation. Thus, no witness or accomplice could help uncover a larger network. Because the suspect was a foreign citizen, Singapore was obligated to follow Article 36 of the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, meaning the Australian embassy or consulate had to be notified of his arrest and allowed access to him as soon as possible. But in reality, Van had been interrogated throughout the night of December 12th and the day of December 13th, while the Australian side was only notified in the late afternoon of December 13th. Van's defense later argued that the delay in consular access violated procedure, but the court dismissed this claim, stating that consular rights were granted before the investigation concluded and that all of Van's statements had been made voluntarily. Across 4 recorded statements, Van clearly described the events, from meeting Tan to receiving the drugs and being arrested. His statements were consistent and logically coherent, and the court accepted them as a full confession under Singapore's evidentiary rules. Notably, in the statement dated December 19, 2002, Van expressed deep remorse and admitted all elements of the offense. As for further investigation, Singaporean authorities collaborated with Australian police, but could not arrest anyone else. Sun remained an unidentified phantom, and although authorities checked for a man named Tan in Melbourne, no actionable leads were found. There were indications that Australian police once considered the option of setting up a sting operation by asking Singapore to release Van so he could continue his journey, allowing authorities to follow him to the recipient in Melbourne and capture the entire network. However, Singapore firmly refused, unwilling to gamble national security on such an experiment. Furthermore, Singaporean law at the time imposed a mandatory death sentence for trafficking large quantities of illegal drugs, leaving no mechanism for sentence reduction in exchange for cooperation. In fact, the court acknowledged that Van had cooperated extensively, providing all information and contact numbers linked to the case, but existing law simply did not allow for a lighter sentence based solely on that. In March 2004, the case went to trial before the High Court of Singapore. Proceedings were swift because the defendant had already pleaded guilty. Van was represented by defense lawyer Joseph Thesaira and assistant Tito Isaac, while 2 deputy public prosecutors represented the state. In court, Van appeared calm, though resigned. He confirmed that he had carried 396 grams of heroin through the airport, but lawyer Thesaira immediately presented 3 main arguments in his defense. First, he argued that the mandatory death penalty under Singapore's Misuse of Drugs Act was unconstitutional, conflicting with Article 9, Right to Life, and Article 12, Right to Equal Protection, of the Singapore Constitution. They contended that an inflexible punishment that ignored all mitigating circumstances amounted to a cruel and arbitrary deprivation of life. However, the panel of judges, led by Chief Justice Yong Pung Hao, rejected this argument, citing legal precedent that mandatory capital punishment did not violate the Constitution and had been clearly established by Parliament. Second, the defense argued that Van's statements during the investigation might not have been entirely voluntary because he was not granted early consular access. They referenced the Vienna Convention and requested the court to exclude some statements made before the Australian consul met Van on the afternoon of December 13th. However, Justice Kan Ting Chiu ruled that there had been no serious violation. He reasoned that even if consular notification had been delayed by 20 hours, this did not render the statements coerced or unreliable. In reality, Van had signed each page of his statements, and even his defense lawyer admitted that police had not threatened or mistreated him during questioning. Third, the defense focused on Van's unique circumstances, that he was a first-time courier pressured into the role and not acting for personal profit. They hoped the court would consider humanitarian factors in seeking leniency. The lawyer also submitted multiple letters requesting clemency from Van's family, friends, and even a church bishop. However, Justice Kan Ting Chiu firmly stated that the law did not allow personal circumstances to be considered for this offense. He explained that anyone caught importing more than 15 grams of heroin into Singapore faced only one possible punishment: death. In other words, the court's job was merely to determine whether the accused had committed the crime. Once guilt was established, the death sentence was mandatory. Thus, on March 20th, 2004, the court convicted Nguyen Tuong Van of importing 396.2 grams of heroin and sentenced him to death. When the verdict was read, Van remained silent, showing little emotion except for the redness in his eyes. He seemed mentally prepared for this moment. He then turned toward his crying mother and nodded gently, as if trying to comfort her. Legally, the death sentence was unsurprising, as it was a statutory requirement. But it marked the beginning of a long battle for his family and the Australian government to try to save his life. Van immediately filed an appeal to the Court of Appeal of Singapore. On October 20th, 2004, the appeal was heard by a panel of 3 senior judges. Lawyer Thazaira continued to argue on constitutional and procedural grounds, hoping to overturn the sentence. He cited international law and the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but the court responded that international norms could not override domestic law. Regarding the constitutionality of mandatory capital punishment, the Court of Appeal maintained its position that no violation existed. Thus, in its decision on October 21st, 2004, the court upheld the death sentence for Nguyen Tuong Van, affirming that Singaporean law did not allow judges to consider humanitarian factors in such cases. With all domestic legal avenues closed, the unfortunate young man had no remaining options in Singapore. Yet outside, Van's family and the Australian government continued fighting until the very last moment. In January 2005, both the Governor-General of Australia and the Australian Prime Minister sent letters requesting clemency for Van to Singapore's President Selapan Nathan. In February 2005, Australian Prime Minister John Howard personally met Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong on the sidelines of a regional summit and brought up Van's case. Howard later recounted that he had told Singapore directly that the Australian public cared deeply about the matter and hoped the Singaporean government would consider humanitarian grounds. But Prime Minister Lee responded only that the case was being reviewed carefully at all levels. In reality, Singapore's cabinet had held several sessions to discuss Nguyen Tuong Van's clemency request. Under Singapore's procedure, ministers deliberate and then advise the president. Media reports stated that although Singapore sympathized with Van's circumstances, they feared setting a dangerous precedent if they showed leniency toward foreign drug offenders. Singapore also faced internal pressure, as a large majority of its citizens supported the death penalty for drug trafficking and did not want the government to appear lenient under foreign political pressure. As a result, all efforts gradually became futile. On October 21st, 2005, Singapore's Ministry of Home Affairs issued an official letter denying Nguyen Tuong Van's clemency petition. Van's family in Melbourne was devastated by the news. Australian Prime Minister John Howard somberly stated on television that this was a stark reminder of how harsh Asian drug laws could be. He affirmed that the Australian government had done everything within its power, but Singapore maintained a firm stance. On November 17th, 2005, Van's family received another letter from Singapore informing them that the execution date had been set for December 2nd, 2005. This meant that the condemned prisoner had less than half a month left to live. His mother, Kim Nguyen, and his twin brother, Koa, immediately flew to Singapore. They brought religious images and numerous letters from relatives. Upon seeing her son in prison, Mrs. Kim collapsed in tears, begging to take his place. But after nearly 3 years behind bars, Van had found composure and instead became a source of strength for his mother. In his final days, he joined Catholic catechism classes in prison, was baptized, and received the Christian name Caleb. Priests stated that Van had found peace in his faith, repeatedly encouraging his mother to stay strong so he could leave without regret. Meanwhile, public opinion in Australia remained deeply divided. A nationwide poll showed that 47% of Australians supported carrying out the execution, while 46% opposed it. One side believed Singapore's laws had to be respected. The other argued that the death penalty was inhumane. Tensions rose sharply, especially within the Vietnamese community and among Catholic groups who organized large prayer campaigns for Van. Some groups even called for protests and boycotts against Singapore Airlines and the Optus Telecommunications Company, reflecting the anger among parts of the Australian public. The Australian government found itself caught between domestic pressure and diplomatic relations, but ultimately reaffirmed that it would not retaliate against Singapore, prioritizing stable bilateral ties above all. During the final week of November 2005, Mrs. Kim and Koa were allowed to visit Van twice a day, each visit lasting 1 hour. Nguyen Tuong Van appeared strangely optimistic and strong. Lawyer Lex Lazary, after visiting him on November 19th, recounted that Van was courageous, positive, and more concerned for others than for himself. Van asked his lawyer to convey his gratitude to those supporting him back home and reminded Koa to live well for both of them. On November 26th, Prime Minister Howard also met privately with Van's mother to comfort her and listen to the family's final wishes. The last request made by the Australian side was to allow Van's mother to embrace him one last time before the execution. Under Changi prison regulations, all physical contact with death row inmates was strictly prohibited. Visits were conducted only through a glass partition. However, this being an exceptional case, internal debate ensued. On November 29th and 30th of 2005, Singapore's High Commissioner to Australia, Joseph Koh, repeatedly appeared on Australian media to explain Singapore's position. He said he was deeply moved by the mother's grief, but emphasized that the law must be applied equally to both foreigners and Singaporean citizens. He stressed that this strictness had saved countless families from the devastation caused by illegal drugs, and expressed hope that Australians would respect Singapore's legislative sovereignty. Regarding the final contact request, Mr. Koh said the Singaporean government had considered it on humanitarian grounds. On the afternoon of December 1st, 2005, Singapore announced that Nguyen Tuong Van would be allowed to hold hands with his mother and brother one last time. Although an embrace was not permitted, the permission to hold hands was an unprecedented exception in the country's history. That night, the final night before the execution, soft candlelight appeared outside Changi prison. A small group of young people and several Singaporean activists stood at a distance, holding candles in silent prayer for Van. At the same time, in major churches across Melbourne, Sydney, and Canberra, thousands of Australians gathered to hold candlelight vigils. Outside Australia's Parliament House in Canberra, hundreds held signs bearing anguished questions directed at Singapore. At dawn on December 2nd, 2005, the sky over Singapore was still dark. In his death row cell, Nguyen Tuong Van awoke at 5 in the morning. He washed himself carefully and put on the nicest clothes his family had sent him for one final photograph. He was then escorted down the cold corridors of the death row wing. Walking beside him were lawyer Julian McMahon and his brother Kwa, who could not enter the execution chamber but were permitted to follow him up to its door. Koa struggled to hold back tears, whispering prayers under his breath. At exactly 6 o'clock, Nguyen Tuong Van was taken into the execution chamber. The room fell silent as the officer in charge asked him for his final words. Van took a deep breath and clearly said that he apologized to his mother and family, thanked the Australian government and everyone who had tried to help him, and asked God for forgiveness. His voice trembled. After that, the procedures proceeded as scheduled. Van's time of death was recorded as 6:06 a.m. on December 2nd, 2005. After the execution, the body of Nguyen Tuong Van was lowered and handed over to the authorities. In an unexpected and rare humanitarian gesture, Singapore allowed Mrs. Kim Nguyen to see her son one final time before the body was taken away. Lawyer Julian McMahon recalled with emotion that she was permitted to touch his face and stroke his hair one last time, which brought her immense comfort. Perhaps the prison wished to ease the pain of a mother enduring unimaginable loss. At 7:17 in the morning, the prison doctor signed the certificate confirming that Nguyen Tuong Van had passed away. As dawn broke over Singapore, it marked the end of that fateful Friday morning. News of Van's execution quickly spread across the world. In Melbourne, the bells of St. Ignatius Church rang 25 times, each toll symbolizing a year of his life. Hundreds attending the service broke into tears. The presiding priest said that the congregation was praying not only for the soul of Caleb, Van's baptismal name, but also for those who had to make the decision to carry out the sentence. In Canberra, the flag atop Parliament House was lowered to half-mast in remembrance. Prime Minister John Howard, his eyes visibly red, told the press that it was a sad day and that he hoped young Australians would learn a vital lesson: never become involved with illicit substances, not even once. In reality, the Australian government treated the case of Nguyen Tuong Van as a powerful warning to its citizens about the severe consequences of drug-related crimes in Asia. On Singapore's side, the aftermath of this case also forced lawmakers to reconsider their approach. By the year 2012, Singapore officially passed legal amendments, allowing courts to impose life imprisonment instead of mandatory death sentences for drug couriers acting merely as mules, provided they cooperated with investigations or suffered from mental disorders. In other words, starting from the year 2013, judges were able to spare individuals in situations similar to that of Nguyen Tuong Van from the death penalty. Unfortunately, this change came too late for him. Nevertheless, it became a form of indirect legacy of his case, helping save the lives of others in later years. In fact, another well-known death row inmate, Yang Vui Kong from Malaysia, arrested in the year 2007 for trafficking heroin, benefited from the new law, and had his sentence reduced to life imprisonment in the year 2013, narrowly escaping death. On the morning of September 16th, 2022, tension hung over Do Nok Than Street in District 5. Detectives from PC4, working with District 5 police and Tan Bin police, were secretly tailing a young woman riding a motorbike and carrying 3 large boxes in front of her. At exactly 7:30 a.m., just as the suspect left the house at number 75 to 77, officers suddenly moved in and blocked her path. They conducted an identity check on the motorbike and the 3 cardboard boxes she was carrying. When the seal tape was cut open, they found multiple plastic bags filled with white crystals. In total, as much as 11.9 kilograms of illegal drugs had been tightly packaged inside 12 nylon bags. The woman was quickly subdued and identified as Truong Gok Mai. News of the in-the-act arrest was immediately reported to the Special Task Force leadership. So when did this investigation truly begin, and what clue helped police trace the young woman's movements in the first place? In fact, from the early days of 2022, Ho Chi Minh City police had already received intelligence about a large-scale drug supply ring operating in the area. A covert investigation was launched without delay. Through surveillance, the task force noted a striking trend. A large volume of white powder and ecstasy had suddenly begun circulating steadily at unusually low prices. That signaled a major distributor was pushing product onto the market. From the statements of drug users and small-time dealers arrested in earlier minor cases, investigators traced the trail back to a mysterious supply source originating in Cambodia. The ring operated with extreme sophistication. The drugs were transported by car through smaller border crossings, then brought into Saigon for distribution. Every transaction was tightly sealed off, and communication was handled mainly through encrypted phones or secure messaging apps. Faced with this, the task force decided to set a covert surveillance net. Using investigative techniques, authorities obtained the license plate of a car that repeatedly appeared on the Kon Tum Ho Chi Minh City route and showed multiple suspicious signs. The driver was identified as a man named Nguyen Vu Khai Hoang. Instead of making an immediate arrest, detectives chose to let the bait run, allowing the suspect to continue operating so they could uncover the entire network behind him. By September 2022, after compiling intelligence from multiple sources, the task force determined that a major shipment was about to be moved from Cambodia through the Bur Wai border gate in Kon Tum province. Plans were urgently prepared, with the goal of catching the suspects in the act during a transaction, maximizing seized evidence, and dismantling the entire network. As predicted, on September 13th, 2022, Ho Hong drove to the Kon Tum border area to meet an unknown man and receive a suitcase containing illegal drugs. Every move was secretly monitored by surveillance teams. After collecting the shipment, Ho Hong drove straight back to his hometown in Binh Dinh. In the early morning of September 15th, 2022, Ho Hong headed toward Ho Chi Minh City along National Highway 1. A covert unit was already positioned at the city's gateway to intercept him. However, the task force again decided not to arrest him as soon as he entered Saigon. Instead, they quietly followed him to identify the stash location and the person who would directly receive the drugs. At around 7 a.m. that same day, Ho Hong appeared in the Thao Dien area of Thu Duc City. Shortly afterward, a young woman on a motorbike arrived, Truong Ngok Mai acting as a guide to lead Ho Hong's car deeper into the inner city. Detectives maintained a safe distance as they followed. After weaving through several streets, Ho Hong and the woman stopped in front of a house. There, Ho Hong handed over dozens of kilograms of illegal drugs from his vehicle to Mai. The boxes were quickly carried into the house. At that point, the task force judged that the fish was in the net. The goods had been fully assembled, and they were now waiting for distribution branches to come collect them. If officers moved in right then, they could capture both the courier and the stash house. However, once again, commanders chose to hold their position on September 15th. The reason was that they wanted to catch the suspects red-handed at the moment the drugs were being delivered to end customers so they could document the act of trafficking, not merely possession. For that reason, surveillance teams quietly surrounded and monitored the house all day. Every movement Mai made remained under police control. Just as anticipated, later on September 15th, Mai began breaking down the shipment into smaller portions to deliver to lower-level dealers. Her movements were secretly shadowed and recorded as evidence. At the same time, Ho Chi Minh City authorities held an emergency meeting to adjust manpower. Surveillance units were ordered to prepare for a coordinated operation at dawn the next day when Mai would continue delivering the remaining drugs. And then, on the morning of September 16th, 2022, as Mai left the house, detectives waited until she exited the alley before approaching, checking her, and arresting her along with all the evidence. In parallel, multiple other teams moved in at the same time. Based on Mai's initial statement and the surveillance materials collected during the operation, investigators identified several additional suspicious locations in the inner city. On the evening of September 16th, 2022, on Tran Van Dong Street, authorities caught two other women in the act of possessing illegal drugs. They were Trun Kim Loan, 50 years old, and Do Thi Min Tum, 39 years old, found with nearly 1 kilogram of crystal-like substances stored in a room. In District 8, another suspect, Mai Thi Nguyen, 30 years old, was also arrested along with evidence. Nguyen was identified as a link who received drugs from Mai and redistributed them in smaller quantities to other contacts. Immediately after arresting Truong and Ngoc Mai, along with the evidence, the task force's next mission was to track down the mastermind behind the operation. At the scene, Mai confessed that she was only a paid courier acting under the instructions of a man named Chu Ba Chung. This name appeared for the first time, surprising investigators and raising many questions about the suspect's true identity and role within the ring. While Mai was taken to headquarters for questioning, another surveillance team immediately checked her residence at the apartment building at 45 Nguyen Quai Street, District 4. There, authorities discovered a large quantity of evidence, including 11.5 kilograms of powder, nearly 40 kilograms of crystals, 12 kilograms of pills, and other substances, along with a pressing machine and an electronic scale. The volume of drugs hidden there showed that Mai was in fact a key transit hub in the network. In addition, the scene contained many cardboard boxes, packaging tools, notebooks, and documents bearing the name Chu Ba Chung. At the same time, the residences of Lon and Tom, as well as Nigan's stash location in District 8, were searched in coordinated raids. Authorities seized a total of roughly 85 kilograms of evidence. The expanded investigation later determined that the total quantity trafficked by this ring exceeded 100 kilograms. In this case, the suspect's statements played a crucial role in linking the entire chain of events. At the investigation office, the individuals involved Truong Ngoc Mai, Nguyen Vu Kai Hoang, Trun Kim Loan, Do Thi Min Tum, and Mai Thi Nguyen each frankly admitted their actions. Truong Ngoc Mai gave detailed statements about receiving orders from Chu Ba Chung, as well as her dealings with customers of unknown identity. Lone and Tom admitted they received drugs from Mai to redistribute under the direction of a person named Tom. This statement fully matched the evidence collected. From the suspect's testimonies, Chu Ba Chung's role gradually came into focus, but locating and arresting him proved difficult. As soon as he learned his underlings had been caught, Chung left his residence in Ho Chi Minh City. His last phone signal appeared in an outlying suburban area, then disappeared. An overnight manhunt was immediately launched, and the suspect's identifying information was sent to police in neighboring provinces and cities. By tracing his connections, investigators discovered that Chung had previously rented an apartment in Nha Trang Khan and believed he might be hiding there while looking for a way to escape. Immediately, a special task unit coordinated with local forces to conduct a sweep. After several days of stakeouts, Chuba Chung was arrested at a seaside motel while preparing to move again. After checking his documents, authorities determined that Chung was 38 years old, a Canadian citizen of Vietnamese origin. Unlike his accomplices, Chung initially did not admit to being the mastermind. At the investigation office and in court, the suspect insisted he had been coerced. Chung claimed that after gambling and falling into debt to a man named Tri in Cambodia, his identification documents were seized and he was threatened, forcing him to take part in transporting shipments to pay off the debt. According to Chung, Tri was the real operator, while Chung was merely following orders and did not profit much. This statement initially hindered the investigation, because if Chung truly had been coerced, his role and motive would have been entirely different. However, authorities assessed this claim as not very credible because it conflicted with other evidence. In reality, Chung acted very proactively, from hiring Truong Ngoc Mai as an assistant, arranging his own accommodation, setting up storage locations, to paying subordinates. These actions showed that Chung played an organizing and operational role, not merely that of someone being directed. Meanwhile, accomplices such as Mai and Hoang both stated that they received orders and dealt directly with Chung and knew nothing about the existence of a person named Tri. Data extracted from their phones further supported this, as messages and calls indicated that Chung was the one directly coordinating all delivery and handoff activities. Faced with this undeniable evidence, investigators had sufficient grounds to reject Chuba Chung's denial. The task force concluded that even if he may have been drawn in at first, Chung later willingly became deeply involved and turned into the key operational link in Vietnam, with a clear profit motive. The investigation found that for each kilogram successfully sold, Chung gained between $100 and $200. For that reason, his claim that he was forced was deemed entirely unconvincing. In parallel with taking statements, authorities arranged confrontations between suspects to clarify the remaining hidden links. From information provided by Trun Kim Lon and Do Thi Min Tum, investigators identified another figure known as Tom. This person operated independently from Chung and headed a separate distribution branch running in parallel. However, verifying Tom's identity proved difficult because both Lon and Tom communicated only by phone and had never met this person in person. The lead quickly hit a dead end when the phone number extracted from Lon's device was determined to be a disposable burner SIM. Similarly, Bin, the person Mai was supposed to deliver 12 kilograms of illegal drugs to on the morning of September 16th, 2022, also used false information and immediately cut off contact upon learning that links in the ring had been arrested. Even Thak, the Cambodia-based supplier and Hoang's creditor, vanished without a trace. It appeared that the ringleaders had prepared countermeasures very carefully, using fake identities and ready to cut loose to preserve their operation whenever trouble arose. Faced with this situation, Vietnamese authorities sent official requests for international cooperation, asking Cambodia and Canada to help verify the identities of Trey and Thak, as well as Chuba Chung's criminal record. The responses indicated that Chung had no prior convictions in Canada, most likely because his criminal activity was primarily carried out in Vietnam. As for Tri and Thatch, the lack of accurate identifying information created enormous obstacles for tracing them in the neighboring country. Although expanded investigations along the border routes have been maintained, to this day, the whereabouts of these shadowy figures remain unknown. After completing the investigation, Ho Chi Minh City authorities transferred the full case file to the People's Procuracy and recommended prosecution of the suspects. A supplemental investigation conclusion issued in September 2024 clearly assigned criminal responsibility to each individual. Accordingly, Chuba Chung and Truong Ngoc Mai bore the highest responsibility for the entire quantity of more than 100 kilograms of illegal drugs seized and trafficked. The remaining links also faced corresponding charges. Mai Thi Nguyen was held responsible for more than 1.3 kilograms, Trun Kim Lon for about 2.9 kilograms, Do Thi Min Tum for about 1.9 kilograms, and Nguyen Vu Kai Ho Hong for more than 40 kilograms that he personally transported. These figures underscored the scale and exceptionally serious nature of the case. On September 12, 2024, investigators formally recommended prosecuting Chuba Chung and 5 accomplices for illegal trading and illegal transportation of narcotics. Chu Ba-chung, the figure behind the operation moving more than 100 kilograms of narcotics, had a strikingly dual life, an immigrant existence abroad and a downward spiral into the underworld. Chung was born in 1,984 inches Quang Ninh. At the age of 9, he moved with his family to Canada, where he later obtained foreign citizenship. Around 2018 to 2019, Chung returned to Vietnam and became a courier agent for a person of unknown identity named Tri in the Ho Chi Minh City area. He personally traveled to meeting points in Tay Ninh, Dak Nong, and Kon Tum to pick up shipments, then transported them back to Ho Chi Minh City for storage. To conceal his identity, Chung constantly changed residences. He even rented a high-end apartment in Nha Trang Con to hide for a period before moving back into Ho Chi Minh City. In Vietnam, Chung frequently associated with gamblers and underworld figures, partying hard to build relationships for the distribution network. From someone drowning in debt, Chung gradually made a substantial amount of money through this illegal work. According to investigators, given the volume of shipments circulating in the hundreds of kilograms, he pocketed tens of thousands of USD in commissions. While running the network, Chung also recruited Truong Ngoc Mai, who was just in her early 20s at the time, as a key assistant. He proactively offered her a weekly payment of $400 to receive shipments from the border, then store them and break them down for delivery to lower-level dealers. In his role as an organizer, Chung operated with extreme secrecy. He rarely met his underlings in person, instead issuing orders mostly through messages or brief phone calls. When communicating, Chung often introduced himself as Long, a nickname used to conceal his true identity. This network did not rely on a single hub. Parallel branches also existed. A clear example was that some shipments were delivered to Trun Kim Loan under instructions from someone named Tom, showing a multi-layered distribution system with complex tiers. By late 2021, Chung began expanding the range of goods he handled to include both white powder and pressed tablet drugs, pushing the risk level even higher. Meanwhile, Thach Trai's associate also brought Nguyen Vu Khai Hoang into the operation as a main transporter. Under heavy debt pressure, Ho Hoang agreed to use his personal car to carry illegal drugs from the border to Ho Chi Minh City, gradually paying down what he owed. From March to September 2022, Ho Hoang successfully completed multiple runs, delivering shipments directly to Mai, one of the links in Chung's network. The collaboration between Chung and Tri reached a peak in mid-2022 as increasing volumes flowed into the southern market, driving prices sharply downward and stirring talk throughout the underworld. Sensing that the situation had become sensitive, Chung decided to pull off one more major job before temporarily laying low to wait and see. In early September 2022, Tri notified him that more than 40 kilograms would be moved for an important transaction. Chung immediately mobilized everything he had, ordering Mai to clear out the stash and alert contacts to be ready to receive. On September 15th, after Hoang successfully transported the shipment into the inner city, Mai took custody of all the goods and immediately divided them up to meet the flood of orders that day. But that very operation became the turning point of fate. On the morning of September 16th, 2022, just as Mai was preparing to deliver the remaining nearly 12 kilograms of illegal drugs, she was caught in the act by authorities. The emergency searches that followed quickly dismantled the entire network. On December 16th, 2024, the People's Court of Ho Chi Minh City opened the first instance trial of Chu Ba-chung and his accomplices. After 3 consecutive days of proceedings, the People's Procuracy presented the indictment, charging Chu Ba-chung, Truong Ngoc Mai, Trun Kim Loan, Mai Thich Ngan, and Do Min Tam with illegal trafficking of narcotics. Nguyen Vu Khai Hoang was charged separately with illegal transportation. Because the quantity of evidence was exceptionally large, the recommended sentences for all defendants fell within the highest penalty bracket. At trial, most defendants admitted guilt and expressed remorse. However, Chu Ba-chung remained notably calm. Under questioning, he coldly repeated his claim that he had been coerced by a figure named Trey, attempting to deny his role as the mastermind. Even so, the prosecutor immediately challenged and dismissed that argument with a series of solid pieces of evidence proving Chung's leadership role. The courtroom grew heavy as the proceedings moved into sentencing. The presiding judge stated that the defendant's actions were exceptionally grave and that the massive quantity involved posed immeasurable harm to society. In this case, Chuba Chung was determined to be the ringleader who directly recruited others to commit organized crimes. Although the trial panel acknowledged several mitigating factors such as a cooperative attitude, being first-time offenders, and the fact that Nguyen and Tum were raising children under 3 years old overall, the group's crimes were deemed intolerable and required the harshest punishment as a deterrent. Based on that assessment, the court ruled Chuba Chung, Truong Ngoc Mai, and Trun Kim Loan were each sentenced to death for illegal trafficking of narcotics. Vu Kai Huang was also sentenced to death for illegal transportation. Meanwhile, the two defendants, Mai Thi Ngan and Do Thi Min Tom, received life imprisonment after mitigating circumstances were considered due to them raising young children. After the verdict was read, the courtroom seemed to freeze for a moment, then erupted in sobs. The defendants' families could not hold back their emotions. At the witness stand, Truong Ngoc Mai collapsed and had to be supported and escorted out by officers. Nguyen and Tom clung to each other and cried, spared from the maximum sentence, even though life imprisonment still meant they would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Ho Hong looked stunned, murmuring words of despair. Only Chuba Chung tried to maintain composure, though his face had turned deathly pale. Instead of continuing to proclaim his innocence, he offered a belated apology to his family and to society, admitted his wrongdoing, and accepted the consequences. The trial concluded, and the defendants were led back to detention in the midst of too late regret. The case of Chuba Chung, a Canadian Vietnamese who led a network transporting 100 kilograms of narcotics, left many echoes and hard lessons behind. It sparked heated discussion about immigration control, as well as the scourge of gambling and other social ills. Across the media, the case was widely covered to underscore the authorities' determination to crack down on crime. Public opinion largely supported the harsh verdicts, viewing them as a costly warning for anyone tempted to stray onto the wrong path. Although the investigation was successfully concluded, it still left lingering concerns about unanswered details. To this day, higher-level links such as Tri, Thoch, and Tom, the true ringleaders, have not been captured. Like shadows in hiding, they may have changed their names and identities to continue running illegal operations elsewhere. This reality poses a difficult challenge for authorities, especially in the realm of international cooperation to combat cross-border crime. In the early weeks of 2016, in San Jose, a postal inspector accidentally discovered a series of suspicious packages sent from overseas, with their destination listed as the city of Santa Cruz. These parcels immediately drew attention due to their vague customs declarations, along with unusual weight and packaging characteristics. Believing this could be a cross-border drug trafficking case, the postal inspector promptly reported it to Homeland Security Investigations, the agency responsible for handling international smuggling cases. This shocking information was then quickly forwarded to the regional enforcement team of the Santa Cruz Police Department, a unit composed of elite officers specializing in narcotics and gang-related crimes, to coordinate a takedown strategy. Upon receiving the tip, local investigators worked closely with the postal inspector and Homeland Security agents to track the movement of the parcels. Through their review, they identified a total of 3 suspicious addresses scattered throughout the city, including a residence in the 400 block of Locust Street, the 200 block of Castilian Terrace, and the 100 block of Peach Terrace. All of these locations shared one common pattern. They continuously received multiple packages from overseas within a short period of time. Investigators' instincts told them this was certainly no coincidence. As they dug deeper, they discovered that these addresses were closely connected to a group of students affiliated with 2 well-known organizations at the University of California, Santa Cruz: the fraternity Lambda Phi Epsilon and the sorority Alpha Kappa Delta Phi. For several weeks, the investigative team secretly monitored all delivery activities at the suspicious addresses to ensure no detail was overlooked. Just as expected, the individuals who came to collect the packages were none other than the students already under scrutiny. Each time a parcel was delivered, detectives quietly gathered additional key evidence, from surveillance, images, and timestamps to the suspect's transaction methods. After the evidence file had been thoroughly consolidated, police determined that the time to move in had come. On March 4th, 2016, a large-scale interagency operation was launched to catch the suspects red-handed at the scene. The plan was mapped out with meticulous care and caution. According to the strategy, authorities would patiently wait until the parcels containing illegal substances were delivered directly into the recipient's hands before simultaneously moving in to restrain them, ensuring the suspects would have no opportunity to dispose of the evidence. As planned, that afternoon, just as the postal worker had left, simultaneous search warrants were executed. The Santa Cruz Police Department's tactical team, in coordination with the County Anti-Crime Task Force, drug enforcement agents, postal inspectors, and Homeland Security agents, suddenly stormed the apartments. The once peaceful atmosphere of the student housing complex was shattered by the pounding footsteps and flashing lights of law enforcement. At the scene, officers quickly subdued those present and seized the parcels filled with pills suspected to be stimulants that had just been delivered. According to the official report, at the apartment on Peach Terrace, 3 female students were arrested along with all the evidence. At the same time, at the address on Locust Street, 2 male students were taken into custody, while at Castilian Terrace, another male student met the same fate. At the scene, authorities confiscated a large quantity of colorful pills carefully sealed in vacuum-packed plastic bags. In total, there were approximately 5,000 pills suspected to be stimulants, weighing about 1.86 kilograms, neatly packed inside the recently delivered parcels and ready for distribution. According to law enforcement estimates, the seized items were worth up to $100,000 if they had successfully reached the market. In addition, numerous other pieces of evidence were seized, including shipping documents, parcel packaging, and transaction records. From what appeared to be ordinary packages, the crime scene ultimately revealed an extensive smuggling network operating under the cover of student life. Notably, also on March 4th, a second large shipment that was on its way to the group of suspects was intercepted in time by Homeland Security agents. This detail highlighted the alarming scale and frequency of the operation, as shipments appeared to have been ordered continuously. It is even possible that additional consignments were en route and would have arrived had authorities not intervened in time. All the collected clues fit together seamlessly, exposing a closed and well-organized trafficking ring. Based on the evidence obtained, police determined that the illegal substances were typically smuggled from overseas via postal services and then sent to various addresses belonging to members of the group. This tactic of dividing shipments was intended to avoid concentrating large quantities in a single location that might arouse suspicion. The entire supply was then consolidated for distribution to buyers. Exploiting the public postal service allowed the suspects to blend in and conceal their activities among the countless legitimate parcels transported each day. Within this network, each member played a distinct role and coordinated smoothly with the others. Responsibilities were systematically divided, from contacting overseas suppliers and using personal residential addresses to receive parcels, to consolidating the shipments and organizing their distribution to the market. Although the specific methods of communication are still being clarified, investigators suspect that the suspects may have conducted transactions through dark web platforms or relied on discrete personal connections to maintain confidentiality. The group allegedly chose tablet-form stimulants because of their extremely compact size, making them easier than ever to conceal and transport. In addition, this type of stimulant is highly popular among young people, making it relatively easy to find buyers. Investigators believe that the shipment was likely targeted directly at students at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and surrounding areas, or possibly distributed to other universities and large-scale parties. A deeper investigation also revealed a troubling fact: the group of students appeared to have been operating quietly for quite some time. Police suspect that, prior to being exposed, multiple similar shipments had successfully slipped past law enforcement. To maintain this illegal operation, the male and female students worked in close coordination, exploiting both their friendships and the discreet nature of the fraternity and sorority system as a shield to conceal their unlawful activities. In this case, all 6 arrested suspects were very young students, only 21 years old, and enrolled at the University of California, Santa Cruz. The group included 3 male students from the fraternity Lambda Phi Epsilon and 3 female students from the sorority Alpha Kappa Delta Phi. What was even more astonishing was that some individuals in the group had previously held leadership positions within campus organizations and were trusted and admired by their peers. Yet behind the image of model students were extremely serious allegations involving controlled substances. The first name mentioned was Mariah Dremel, a member of the sorority Alpha Kappa Delta Phi. Mariah was arrested on charges of conspiracy and possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. Next was Nguyen, commonly known as Nancy Nguyen, along with Cecilia Lei. These two Vietnamese female students were also members of Alpha Kappa Delta Phi and were arrested on charges of unlawful possession of a controlled substance. However, their charges were considered less severe as they did not include allegations of conspiracy to distribute. The final three names on the list were members of the fraternity Lambda Phi Epsilon, including Benny Liu, Nathan Teo, and Caesar Castle. These male students were arrested and faced serious charges of conspiracy as well as possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. The fact that four members of the group, Mariah, Benny, Caesar, and Nathan were additionally charged with conspiracy indicates that investigators believe they played key roles and were directly involved in planning the operation. Meanwhile, the remaining two female students, Nguyen and Cecilia Lei, were charged solely with possession. It is possible that they held lesser roles, such as receiving packages or providing assistance, but their actions still constituted serious legal violations. What they all had in common was their young age and educational background. They were third or fourth year students who should have been holding bright futures in their hands. This stark contrast between the image of exemplary students and their involvement with controlled substances left the public in shock. The case even sparked troubling prejudices. On social media, some comments with racist undertones suggested that it was not surprising for individuals of Asian descent to be involved with illegal substances. Although such biased opinions were quickly condemned and removed by the University of California community, the incident demonstrated the multifaceted negative impact the case had generated. Looking back at the entire case, it can be seen as a deeply regrettable downward spiral. It likely began with greed, when the group realized that these stimulants were highly sought after at parties. With a retail price ranging from $20 to $25 per pill, successfully selling 5,000 pills could have generated more than $100,000. For students still sitting in lecture halls, this represented an enormous profit. The lure of money ultimately drove them to take the risk of sourcing wholesale supplies from overseas. According to the reconstruction by investigators, the illegal goods were carefully packaged and disguised before being shipped from abroad into the United States postal system. To minimize risk, the group deliberately divided deliveries among three separate receiving locations. Once the parcels arrived, designated members would quickly conceal them, then regroup to divide the quantity into smaller portions and plan distribution. Potential customers were most likely young partygoers, ranging from students on campus to individuals in nearby areas. Furthermore, given the relatively short distance to San Francisco, a city known for hosting vibrant music festivals, it is possible that the controlled substances were also intended for distribution at such large-scale events. From the moment the handcuffs were locked around their wrists, the futures of all 6 students took a completely different turn. The days once spent in lecture halls and with textbooks were replaced by the cold walls of detention and the long, drawn-out legal proceedings ahead. This operation was regarded as a major success, as a trafficking ring worth billions of dong was completely dismantled. More importantly, authorities managed to intercept a large quantity of illegal substances in time, preventing them from reaching the streets and causing harm to society. After their arrest, the group of students was taken into custody and faced criminal proceedings at the Santa Cruz County Court. The formal charges included conspiracy and possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, both of which are considered felonies under California law. The differences in the severity of the charges reflected the distinct roles each individual allegedly played within the operation and would be considered separately by the court. Based on this, the judge set different bail amounts. Within a few days, all 6 students posted bail and were released, meaning they would not remain in custody while awaiting trial. On the side of the University of California, Santa Cruz, the administration took swift and decisive action immediately after the case was exposed. Specifically, the university promptly issued temporary suspensions against all 6 students involved and prohibited them from participating in any activities on campus. University representatives affirmed that if the investigation ultimately determined the students were guilty, an internal disciplinary process would proceed in parallel with the legal proceedings conducted by authorities. According to Scott Hernandez Jason, the university's director of communications, even though the alleged misconduct occurred off campus, the students could still face the most severe disciplinary measure, expulsion. Echoing this stance, Vice Provost Allison Galloway emphasized that removing the individuals would be unavoidable in order to protect the reputation and integrity of the academic community should the allegations be proven true. Alongside the university's decisions, the Santa Cruz chapters of Lambda, Phi Epsilon, and Alpha Kappa Delta Phi were also immediately suspended. Both organizations publicly committed to conducting serious internal reviews and affirmed that they would expel any member found to have violated the law or breached the organization's strict policies regarding controlled substances. Legally, the investigation continued actively after the arrests in order to uncover every remaining link in the trafficking chain. Santa Cruz police stated that they would expand the scope of the investigation to trace the overseas supply source and determine whether any additional accomplices were still at large. At this point, the prospect of lengthy prison sentences loomed over the defendants. For charges involving possession and distribution of large quantities of controlled substances, under California law, the students could face penalties of many years in prison if convicted. However, due to the complex nature of the case, legal proceedings were expected to take considerable time. During this waiting period, the students would be required to appear in court repeatedly for hearings, where they might negotiate plea agreements or await a final verdict from a jury. As of now, specific details regarding the final sentences for each defendant have not been publicly disclosed. It is possible that the case was resolved quietly through plea agreements, allowing the defendants to receive reduced sentences. However, regardless of the legal outcome, one thing is certain: they traded away their once promising futures with their own hands. Their personal records now carry a stain that will be difficult to erase, leaving their academic paths abruptly interrupted and their career opportunities gradually closing, all because of a reckless decision made in their youth. The case involving parcels of illegal substances at the University of California, Santa Cruz has officially come to an end, but its lingering impact remains a costly lesson for society. First and foremost, the story sounded an alarm about the presence of addictive substances, even within educational environments, places traditionally considered safe and healthy. Few could have imagined that energetic and promising students would fall so far as to turn their own residences into transit hubs for illegal goods. The incident also urged other universities to tighten education and oversight efforts among students, particularly within large student organizations. As police spokesperson Joyce Blaschke emphasized, such a situation could occur at any institution, not just the University of California, Santa Cruz. Indeed, as long as the demand for partying and the desire for quick money persist, the temptation of stimulants can infiltrate even the most unexpected places. For young people, especially students, this story stands as a tragic warning about exchanging one's future for illicit profit. 6 outstanding students destroyed their academic careers, hurt their families, and faced the possibility of prison sentences because of the illusion of illegal wealth. They not only paid a price before the law, but also lost their reputations, friendships, and the bright aspirations of youth. The University of California, Santa Cruz student community also endured scrutiny and stricter oversight in the aftermath of the case. However, through the efforts of the university administration and student leaders, the community united to overcome this difficult period. The case also sparked discussions about supporting students struggling with mental health issues or substance abuse. Counseling and therapeutic support programs were introduced shortly afterward in an effort to prevent similar tragedies from occurring again. In the middle of 2019, a mysterious account named Addy4Cheap suddenly rose to prominence on dark web trading platforms such as Empire Market and Kryptonia Market. On these online black markets, Addy4Cheap advertised a so-called premium orange-colored drug claimed to be genuine Adderall. This is a prescription medication used to treat ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and is classified as a legal psychotropic drug. Of course, unauthorized drugs being funneled onto the dark web was nothing new. What was unusual, however, was that the Addy4Cheap account quickly received hundreds of positive reviews, indicating extremely high sales volume in a short time. But if it were truly selling medication for ADHD, a condition that is not particularly common, how could it possibly sell so rapidly? This anomaly caught the attention of the FBI's high-tech task force in Washington. To verify the situation, federal agents decided to conduct test purchases. From August to December of 2019, the FBI placed 20 orders from Addy4Cheap and received a total of 767 orange pills weighing approximately 268 grams. The forensic results quickly sent chills down the investigators' spines. All of the pills contained methamphetamine, a prohibited and highly addictive substance, rather than the pharmaceutical ingredient Adderall. This meant that a disguised supply of illicit stimulants was quietly poisoning users across the United States. Although the seller was anonymous behind a screen, all of the counterfeit drug packages were shipped through the United States Postal Service. By analyzing postal data and electronic transaction records, investigators were initially able to narrow down the operating area of Addy 4 Cheap to Northern Virginia, specifically around the Fairfax area. This suggested that the seller was most likely operating locally, rather than from a distant foreign country. This lead was further reinforced by postal security camera footage. A blurry CCTV image showed the silhouette of an Asian man frequently appearing late at night to mail small parcels. The Federal Bureau of Investigation decided to accelerate the investigation, transferring the case to the FBI field office in Washington, D.C., to coordinate with the Fairfax County Police Department and the United States Postal Service. After several months of surveillance, federal authorities decided to strike in the early morning of December 9, 2019. Court-approved search warrants were swiftly executed, targeting residential addresses linked to the Addy 4 Cheap account. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, the task forces simultaneously raided two main locations: an apartment in the Greenbrier area of Fairfax County and another house in Chantilly. The scene left investigators stunned. Inside the Greenbrier apartment, nearly 100 orange pills, identical to the counterfeit drugs the agents had previously purchased, were scattered across the kitchen table and the living room cabinet. At the Chantilly house, police seized a massive quantity of more than 6,000 orange tablets, with a total weight of about 2.2 kilograms, all matching the shape, logo, and color of the fake Adderall pills. The tablets were poorly packaged, some were kept in plastic bags, while others were stored in cardboard boxes labeled as raisins to disguise them during mailing. Clearly, the suspects had tried to use food packaging to fool inspectors. A strong chemical odor hit investigators' noses, mixed with the smell of cardboard from dozens of shipping boxes strewn everywhere. Digital scales, a heat sealer for bagging, fake address labels, bubble wrap, everything indicated that this location had been used as a workshop to package contraband for shipment across the country. In the middle of a picture-perfect residential neighborhood, the suspects had turned the house into a stockpile of addictive drugs ready to spread poison throughout the community. With their investigative experience, officers quickly noted key clues. The quantity seized was significant, but likely not the entirety. This suggested there was still inventory elsewhere, or that much of it had already been sold. In addition, police seized multiple devices, including computers, phones, cryptocurrency wallets, and ledgers listing recipient addresses. These items were sealed as evidence for forensic testing and data extraction. More importantly, the biggest haul from this raid was the suspects themselves. In Fairfax County, police arrested Nguyen Kim Thi Phan, 37 years old. At the Chantilly scene, Han Lam Luc, 35 years old, was also caught and arrested with the evidence. At the same time, police executed arrest warrants for several other accomplices connected to the group across the area, including Nguyen, 29 years old, in Springfield, Sun Nguyen, 36 years old, in Annandale, Dat Nguyen, 37 years old, in Alexandria, and Triet Hoang, 39 years old, in Springfield. All of them were of Vietnamese or Asian origin, living around Northern Virginia. However, in the end, they were merely the hands and feet of the person behind it all. Their statements, though evasive, consistently pointed to one individual, a mysterious ghost known as Tyler Pham. His real name was Pham Thai, born in 1983. He held Vietnamese nationality but had moved to the United States when he was young, living mainly in Northern Virginia. Before the case came to light, Tyler lived with suspect Nguyen Kim Thi Phan in the Greenbrier house in Fairfax. Neighbors described him as quiet and reserved, with no unusual behavior. It could be said that Tyler Pham lived two parallel lives. By day, he was an Asian resident quietly blending into the community with no prior criminal record. By night, he became an anonymous online trafficker of illegal drugs. On December 27, 2019, the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia issued an arrest warrant for Tyler Pham on charges of conspiracy to distribute 500 grams or more of methamphetamine. However, he had long since vanished. Investigators confirmed that the last time Tyler Pham was seen in the United States was in Northern Virginia, just before the search warrants were executed. So where was he now? To quickly crack the case, the investigative task force mobilized resources and split into two teams working in parallel. The first team focused on forensic analysis of the seized evidence and on taking statements from suspects and witnesses to strengthen the case file. The second team urgently tracked down the fugitive, Tyler Pham. The investigative team's initial assessment after the late 2019 raid was that they were facing a sophisticated cybercrime operation. The counterfeit pills seized at the scene indicated a very large distribution scale. These orange tablets looked identical to prescription Adderall, 30 mg, showing that the group had invested in producing fake pharmaceuticals. Although no manufacturing machinery was found at the scene, the presence of thousands of pills made it clear that this network had a large and stable methamphetamine supply. Federal investigators then began analyzing the seized evidence. Their goal was to trace electronic transactions, identify customer lists, cryptocurrency wallet addresses, and messages on the dark web. Alongside that, forensic results confirmed that the tablets contained methamphetamine mixed with fillers, with a potency strong enough to leave users dazed, explaining why the Addy4Cheap account received so many glowing reviews. Customers thought they were taking a legal psychotropic medication, but in reality, they were getting high on an illegal drug. This became key evidence supporting charges of fraud and distribution of controlled substances against the suspects. In addition, statements from the arrested accomplices greatly aided the investigation. At first, several of them tried to dodge responsibility by minimizing their roles. Nguyen Phan claimed she was merely a housemate and had no involvement in trafficking. Han Luk said he was only storing a few boxes for a friend. However, contradictions became obvious when their statements were compared with the physical evidence. Police found phone messages between Luk and Tyler Pham discussing shipping and today's orders, proving Luk's role in packaging and delivery. Faced with the evidence, Luk had to admit guilt and cooperate. Similarly, after hearing a secretly recorded voice call between her and Tyler, Nguyen Phan also admitted that she had helped her boyfriend hide money from drug sales. Thanks to this cooperation, the full picture gradually became clear. Tyler Pham was the kingpin calling the shots. Dat Wine handled online transactions, Hon Luk managed the stash house, and the others assisted with packaging, mailing through the postal service, and laundering money through cryptocurrency. In addition, the FBI also applied criminal profiling techniques. Based on how Tyler Pham operated the Addy4Cheap account, criminal psychologists assessed that the offender was tech-savvy, highly disciplined, and extremely cautious. He maintained fast customer response times and shipped packages early every morning, indicating a fixed daily routine. He also chose Adderall, a brain drug popular among students, as cover for methamphetamine, showing calculation and market awareness. These details suggested that he may have attended college or worked an office job, living an orderly life rather than being a reckless addict. Indeed, records on Tyler Pham indicated that he had once been an information technology student, emigrated to the United States as a teenager, and was highly proficient with computers. This was supported by network data. FBI agents found that the IP address from Tyler's home accessed the dark web during the same time periods when Addy4Cheap was active, circumstantial evidence strongly indicating that he was the operator of the account. On the fugitive tracking front, a breakthrough emerged when the FBI examined immigration and travel records. Tyler Pham had family in Vietnam, and the database showed that in December 2019, he had booked a flight back to Vietnam. He may have planned this move early, because at that time Vietnam did not yet have an extradition treaty with the United States, so fleeing there would greatly increase his chances of escaping prosecution. But immediately afterward, the Federal Bureau of Investigation activated a mutual legal assistance mechanism with Vietnam's Ministry of Public Security through the United States Department of Justice and the Department of State. Interpol also issued a red notice to formalize Tyler's arrest on a global scale. On the Vietnamese side, despite the absence of an extradition treaty, authorities signaled willingness to cooperate. From there, the case file and evidence were translated and sent to Vietnam, including the United States court arrest warrant and proof of criminal conduct. This coordination proceeded quietly and continuously for many months. Law enforcement officials from both countries regularly exchanged information via a hotline. United States agents even flew over multiple times to meet with Vietnamese police to discuss the arrest plan. However, Throughout 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic erupted, the manhunt became even more difficult. Travel was restricted, and information exchanges between the two countries also slowed as pandemic response took priority. It was not until late 2021, when the situation stabilized, that the investigation reached a turning point. Vietnamese police accelerated covert investigative measures, such as reviewing entry records, filtering individuals with matching names, and conducting checks in the locality where Tyler's family lived. At the same time, the FBI provided additional biometric data on the suspect to Vietnamese authorities. The breakthrough in the final manhunt came from an anonymous witness. This person reported that a middle-aged man frequently appeared at an internet cafe in Ho Chi Minh City, spoke with an American accent, often went online, and had boasted that he had done big business in the United States and just returned. That information was immediately cross-checked against Tyler Pham's file, and the results showed a strong match. From that lead, Vietnamese police quietly narrowed Tyler Pham down among returning overseas Vietnamese in Ho Chi Minh City. After months of surveillance and tracking his movements, by November 2021, they finally identified the hiding place of this ghost. A covert arrest plan was carried out swiftly and cleanly. Early one morning in a quiet alley on the outskirts of Saigon, Vietnamese police suddenly moved in and invited Tyler Pham to the station for questioning. To avoid drawing attention, they did not open a new criminal case locally. Instead, they temporarily detained Tyler Pham administratively, under the pretext of reviewing possible unlawful resident status. After the arrest, they immediately notified the FBI to prepare the handover procedures. This was an extremely sensitive stage. If information leaked too early, the suspect could attempt to delay or contest the transfer by relying on the fact that there was no extradition treaty. But Tyler Pham appeared completely shocked and devastated when he was caught, leaving him no time to mount any legal resistance. The United States government even dispatched a special aircraft to Vietnam to pick up the suspect, and the entire flight crew tested negative for COVID-19 before departure. The handover moment at Noi Bai International Airport on November 16, 2021 was the culmination of a long and arduous investigative journey. In just a few short minutes, the transfer procedures were completed. Tyler Pham officially returned to the custody of United States authorities after 2 years on the run. This cross-border manhunt was praised by the United States Department of Justice as a model of law enforcement cooperation in the era of globalization. The close coordination between agencies successfully stopped a transnational controlled substances trafficker. From the leads collected and the suspect's statements, authorities were able to reconstruct the full sequence of events. In the spring of 2019, Tyler Pham began plotting to make money through the online black market. He planned it together with several trusted Vietnamese friends in the Fairfax area. The group knew that Adderall, a legal psychotropic prescription drug, was popular among students and white-collar workers to boost concentration. Demand was high, but obtaining it legally through a doctor was expensive. So many people turned to the black market. Tyler decided to sell Adderall on the dark web, but instead of the real medication, he used cheap methamphetamine to increase profits. In a discreet rented room in Springfield, Tyler and his accomplices began experimenting. They obtained a quantity of pure methamphetamine powder from a known supplier, bought pill press molds, and purchased orange dye to produce tablets resembling Adderall 30 mg. After several trials, the group managed to manufacture pale orange pills stamped with letters and markings that looked almost identical to genuine Adderall. In May 2019, with help from Dat Nguyen, Tyler Pham created an account on Empire Market. He chose the nickname Addy4Cheap, meaning cheap Adderall, to attract the right target customers. The first batches of counterfeit pills were listed with descriptions like genuine Adderall, peach orange color, strong effects. Buyers had to pay in Bitcoin or Monero because Tyler chose that method to conceal the money trail. From the very first transactions, Addy4Cheap received many 5-star reviews. Seeing promising signs, Tyler and the others expanded the scale. They also listed the product on Kryptonia Market, another online black market, to broaden their sales channels. Tyler ran the group with strict discipline. Every morning, Han Luk was responsible for packaging the pills in candy boxes, raisin boxes, and other containers for camouflage, while Lian Fan printed fake shipping labels. By afternoon, Tyler or one of his underlings would drive around and drop the parcels into public mailboxes at multiple locations to avoid attracting attention. Day by day, sales soared. In just 3 months, Addy Boncheap completed more than 3,600 transactions on Empire and about 140 transactions on Kryptonia. The proceeds were estimated at nearly $500,000 USD, corresponding to roughly 44,872 pills sold. Those numbers made the group members euphoric they never imagined. Making money could be that easy. Only Tyler was the most cautious. He reminded everyone to keep everything strictly secret, not to show off or spend lavishly, and to avoid unusual purchases that could draw attention. For him, anonymity was the strongest armor. Yet behind the blinding glow of money, darkness had already begun to close in. From August 2019, Addy 4 cheap orders entered the crosshairs of a task force. The FBI and its partners carried out multiple covert investigative measures. They purchased pills to secure evidence, tracked the shipping routes of parcels, and even planted a tracking device in one package to trace the GPS signal back to the original mailing drop. Gradually, the net tightened around the Fairfax area. However, Tyler's group still had no idea. They only noticed that by late autumn 2019, business seemed unusually smooth. Many orders were coming from new customers, buying in sizable quantities. In reality, those were bait orders placed by undercover agents. On December 7th, Tyler received a warning email from a dark web account saying that Empire Market might go down. That information may have spooked him. On the night of December 8th, Tyler told Nguyen that he needed to go away for a few days, and he vanished from that point on. When the FBI raided the location and searched Tyler's bedroom, they found only empty hanger's signs that he had taken his belongings and left. After fleeing Virginia, Tyler Pham carried out the plan he had prepared in advance. Using his Vietnamese passport, he bought a one-way plane ticket back to Vietnam. Because he had not yet been arrested or placed under a travel ban at the time, he was able to board a flight transiting through Seoul and land in Ho Chi Minh City in late December 2019. After arriving in Vietnam, Tyler quietly went to the home of a distant relative and stayed there. He quickly discarded his United States SIM card and bought a new SIM registered under a fake name to avoid being tracked. During his months in hiding, Tyler lived on cash and completely avoided all electronic transactions. He also limited his time outside, only occasionally disguising himself by wearing glasses and a mask to buy necessities. In Tyler's mind, Vietnam felt like a safe haven. And indeed, throughout 2020, no one touched him. The extradition of Vietnamese nationals had almost no precedent. Tyler even began thinking about staying in his homeland long term. However, as 2021 arrived and the pandemic eased, the long arm of transnational justice began closing in on Tyler. In mid-November 2021, Tyler Pham was surrounded and arrested by Vietnamese police, ending his 712-day escape on Vietnamese soil. Back in the United States, Tyler Pham was promptly brought before the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia in Alexandria. Faced with an overwhelming mountain of evidence, Tyler chose to cooperate. At his guilty plea hearing in early 2022, he bowed his head and admitted to everything, creating an account to sell fake Adderall containing illegal substances, shipping the products through the mail, and illegally profiting hundreds of thousands of USD. United States District Judge Leonie M. Brinkema questioned the defendant about the consequences of his actions, emphasizing that his flight had forced the court to wait for justice for 2 years. Tyler murmured a belated apology to the community and his family. On July 12, 2022, the sentencing hearing was held in Alexandria. In the courtroom that day were most of Tyler's accomplices, individuals who had already been sentenced earlier but were summoned to testify. A federal prosecutor presented a summary of the case, emphasizing the danger of distributing methamphetamine under the guise of prescription medication and the international resources expended because of Tyler's escape. Notably, the prosecution also cited shocking figures, stating that Tyler's group had distributed 15 to 45 kilograms of pills containing methamphetamine over a few months, creating an enormous public danger. Tyler's defense seized on mitigating factors such as the defendant being a first-time offender, having pleaded guilty, cooperating with investigators, and expressing remorse. The defense also argued that Tyler was born in Vietnam under difficult circumstances and lacked direction, which contributed to his downfall, hoping the judge would show some leniency. And indeed, after a short recess to deliberate, Judge Brinkema sentenced Tyler Pham, 39 years old, to 52 months in federal prison, about 4 years and 4 months, followed by 3 years of supervised release after he completed his prison term. This sentence was significantly lighter than the 10-year minimum prescribed by law for his offense, showing that the court weighed factors such as his remorse and cooperation. Upon hearing a sentence of just over 4 years, Tyler Pham immediately broke into tears. He repeated his apology and promised to rebuild his life after serving his time. After the hearing ended, Tyler was handcuffed and escorted back to federal custody to serve his sentence. Justice had been carried out. The man who spread the nightmare of illicit drugs received a fitting punishment, even though authorities had to go to extraordinary lengths to bring him before the court. As of December 2025, Tyler Pham has served more than 3 years of his sentence. If he maintains good behavior, he may be released in early 2026. However, it is very likely that after completing his prison term, Tyler Pham will be deported from the United States because he holds Vietnamese nationality and was convicted of a serious felony. And so, he will return to his homeland, the very place he once ironically considered a safe hiding place. Since late 2025, authorities in New Orleans had been quietly monitoring a drug-related network in the area for months, gradually building a large-scale covert investigation. The task force included the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office, the New Orleans Police Department, and federal agencies such as Homeland Security Investigations and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This level of coordination suggested the case was not only complex, but also showing signs of spreading across multiple jurisdictions. In the early phase, details of the operation were kept almost entirely out of the public eye. However, the emergence of large quantities of illegal substances moving between Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish may have raised suspicions that a hidden network was operating behind the scenes on a scale far beyond the isolated cases usually seen. Over an extended period, investigators narrowed in on key targets, placed them under surveillance, and used multiple investigative methods to carefully gather evidence. According to a report from the New Orleans Police Department, investigators used both physical surveillance and technical surveillance on suspected locations and individuals. In other words, they may have tracked the suspects' movements, wiretapped phones, or used GPS tracking devices to secretly follow their whereabouts. Through this process, police gradually identified 4 covert addresses believed to be directly tied to the network's operations. At the same time, 4 key suspects in the network gradually came into view. They were all Vietnamese men: Tony Vu Tran, Bill Vaughn, Phi Vaughn, and Jonathan Nguyen. The most notable case was Tony Vu Tran. After verification, police discovered that he had previously been an assistant district attorney in Orleans Parish, serving as a prosecutor in New Orleans from 2014 to 2016, and had only been hired by the Street John Parish District Attorney's Office in November 2025. This information took investigators by surprise. Someone who understood the law and had once stood on the side of justice was now appearing on the list of primary suspects. That detail made the case even more sensitive and forced authorities to be more cautious than ever. They understood that only with airtight evidence could the full truth behind this facade be revealed. Beyond Tony Tran, the identities of the other suspects were also clarified. Bill Vaughn, 41, and Phi Vaughn, 38. Both lived in New Orleans, while Jonathan Nguyen, 37, lived in the suburb of Metairie in Jefferson Parish. To strengthen the case file, investigators closely tracked every movement of the suspects for months, and when they believed the time was right, the task force decided to pull the net. On Tuesday morning, January 20th, 2026, multiple teams moved in at the same time. 4 search warrants were executed simultaneously at 4 different locations across New Orleans. According to case records, the addresses included a house in the West End area near Lake Pontchartrain, a location on Red Boulevard East in New Orleans East, a facility in Village de l'Est, and a site in the Lower Garden District not far from downtown. All were suspected to be covert stash points used to store and distribute the network's goods. In the West End area, New Orleans police, working with federal agents, entered a luxury apartment on Fleur-de-Lis Drive where Tony Tran was present. At the same time, at the other locations, Bill Vaughn, Phi Vaughn, and Jonathan Nguyen were also taken into custody. The operation ended with a complete success. None of the suspects managed to escape, and more importantly, the large volume of evidence stored at these sites was seized before it could be moved or destroyed. The search results later stunned even seasoned officers with the true scale of the operation. More than 400 pounds, about 181 kilograms of marijuana, along with many THC-containing products, were seized. This quantity far exceeded initial estimates. Earlier, a court filing had referenced about 202 pounds connected to Tony Trun, but that was likely only a small portion of the total stash that had been hidden. To support the packaging process, the group also equipped themselves with a vacuum sealer to tightly wrap the bundles and reduce odor from leaking outside. This detail showed a fairly careful level of preparation, because marijuana has a very distinctive smell and is easy to detect if not handled carefully. Clearly, this was not a few scattered pieces of marijuana. It was an entire stash that had been organized and packaged in a highly systematic way. Beyond marijuana, at the stash locations tied to Tony Trun's group, authorities also found a variety of other synthetic and addictive illegal drugs. The seized evidence included MDMA in both powder and pill form, ketamine, psilocybin mushrooms, and methamphetamine. Although the quantities of these substances were described as smaller than the marijuana haul, they still suggested the operation was not focused on a single product, but was fairly diverse, serving different groups of users. From lighter stimulants to stronger hallucinogens, the network appeared to run a kind of drug supermarket, ready to meet a wide range of demands on the underground market. Expanding into synthetic drugs was also believed to maximize profits, since these are high-value products with strong profit margins. In addition to the drugs seized, the amount of cash and valuable assets found at the scene also drew attention. In total, about $135,000 in cash was confiscated, likely proceeds from sales that had not yet been moved through other channels. Police also seized 3 gold bars, worth about $24,000. Stockpiling gold may have been the group's way of storing wealth more safely and avoiding bank and government tracking. On top of that, 3 luxury vehicles were seized, including a high-value Porsche 911. These vehicles were likely purchased with money earned from illegal activity and then used or kept by the suspects as personal assets. Just as notable was the number of weapons discovered during the searches. A total of 7 firearms of various types were recovered. Although the specific models have not been publicly disclosed, a drug operation storing that many weapons presents a serious danger. In many cases, drug traffickers arm themselves to protect their stash, guard against conflicts with other groups, or respond if they are discovered. Fortunately, in this operation, the suspects apparently did not have the chance to use the weapons. In Tony Trun's case specifically, being suspected of illegal weapons possession alongside controlled substances was considered an especially serious factor. Under Louisiana law, possessing firearms in connection with a drug-related offense is treated as an aggravating circumstance and can lead to additional charges, which may be addressed separately during prosecution. After the operation, all 4 suspects were taken to detention facilities to await processing under the law. Because he was arrested in New Orleans, Tony Trun was transferred to the Orleans Justice Center, the Orleans Parish Jail, for holding, where he would face criminal charges. Jonathan Nguyen was arrested while in the Jefferson area and was therefore booked into Jefferson Parish with bail set at $120,000. Meanwhile, Bill Vo and Phi Vo were held without the option of bail because they were identified as individuals who had previously fled Orleans Parish. This detail suggests that Bill and Five may have been wanted, or that there were outstanding warrants in Orleans that had not yet been executed, so they are now being held without conditions while awaiting transfer or the handling of unresolved cases. Denying bail also reflects the court's assessment that the 2 posed a high risk of fleeing or endangering the community. The takedown ended in a decisive victory for law enforcement. All 4 suspects were captured, and a large quantity of illegal drugs, cash, and weapons was seized. However, the story did not end there. Public attention then shifted to uncovering the suspects' true backgrounds and the scale of the organization behind them. In particular, many people wanted to know, why would a prosecutor like Tony Trun step onto this criminal path? Who were his accomplices, and where did they come from? How long had this network been operating, and what other secrets might it be hiding? All of this would gradually be revealed through the expanded investigation and the upcoming legal proceedings. After the arrests, initial information about each suspect's identity and role was gradually released. Among them, Tony Vu Tran, 46, was identified as the central figure in the case and the name that drew the most attention because of his unusual background. He is a Vietnamese American currently living in New Orleans. According to employment records, Tony Tran served as a prosecutor at the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office from 2014 to 2016. After that, he worked briefly at the Jefferson Parish District Attorney's Office. Most recently, in November 2025, Tony Tran was hired as an assistant district attorney in St. John the Baptist Parish. At the time of his arrest, he had held that job for about 2 months. According to Bridget Dinvat, the St. John Parish District Attorney, Tony Tran was recommended with a very good background and was considered an experienced prosecutor. Yet behind the image of a diligent public servant, Tony Tran was accused of playing a key role in the drug trafficking operation. According to information released by Rivarde, Tony Tran was suspected of organizing and running the entire network. The fact that he allegedly used his own residence in the Lakeview area to store more than 400 pounds of marijuana also indicated a direct, hands-on level of involvement in the operation. In response to the shocking information, Bridget Dinvat, the St. John Parish District Attorney, immediately terminated Tony Tran's employment on the very day he was arrested. She stated that the prosecutor's office would not tolerate any misconduct within its ranks. She also noted that Tony Tran had not yet handled any major cases in St. John because he had only been on the job for about 2 months, and that period overlapped with the year-end holiday season. According to her, this ensured that local prosecution files were not affected, helping to reassure the public amid concerns about the case's impact on the justice system. After the information came to light, people who had known Tony Tran also expressed disbelief. On social media, some said he had previously served as their legal representative and they never imagined he would be implicated in something like this. If those accounts are accurate, it is likely that after leaving the district attorney's office in 2016, Tony Tran moved into private legal practice. His knowledge of the law may have helped him conceal wrongdoing for a long time. The second figure in the network was Bill Vaughn, 41, who lived in New Orleans. Up to this point, publicly available information about Bill Vaughn's background has remained limited. However, he was identified as a close associate of Tony Tran and as someone who played an important role in the operation. Most likely, Bill Vaughn acted as a partner or coordinating support, helping Tony Tran maintain and run the drug business over an extended period. Next was 5 Vaughn, 38, also living in New Orleans. 5, Vaughn's role was described as supporting distribution, possibly involving transporting the product, overseeing stash locations, collecting money, or maintaining contact between different links in the chain. The youngest member of the group was Jonathan Nguyen, 37, who lived in Metairie in Jefferson Parish. According to investigators, Jonathan played a distribution role in pushing the drugs onto the market. In other words, he was responsible for moving the product from stash locations to smaller dealers or directly to buyers. Beyond each individual's role, one notable detail was that all 4 suspects were Vietnamese. This quickly drew attention from the overseas Vietnamese community. On community media channels, the story spread with mixed emotions, from shock to disappointment. At the same time, the case was seen as a warning about the severe consequences of illegal drugs within the local Vietnamese community. At present, this massive drug ring case has entered the criminal prosecution stage, as the court system begins reviewing all evidence to deliver final rulings on the defendants. All 4 suspects have been charged with multiple serious offenses involving drugs and weapons across 2 jurisdictions, Orleans Parish and Jefferson Parish. Because the case involves the authority of 2 different areas, the legal process is expected to be complex and lengthy. In Orleans Parish, Tony Tran faces a long list of charges, including possession of marijuana with intent to distribute, possession of MDMA with intent to distribute under 2 separate counts due to both powder and pill forms, and a charge related to possession of drug paraphernalia. In addition, Tony Tran is also accused of carrying a weapon while committing a drug-related offense, an aggravating factor considered especially serious under local law. On the afternoon of January 22, 2026, Tony Tran appeared in Orleans court for the first hearing related to bail. At that time, the specific bail amount had not yet been publicly announced. Given the seriousness of the case and the fact that 2 of his associates were being held without bond, it was entirely possible that Tony Trun would also be denied bail. Meanwhile, in Jefferson Parish, Jonathan Nguyen, Bill Vaughn, and Phi Vaughn would face separate legal proceedings under that parish's laws. Jonathan Nguyen was charged with 5 drug-related offenses involving marijuana, THC products, and 3 other substances. As for Bill Vaughn and Phi Vaughn, prosecutors were expected to file similar charges centered on organizing, storing, and distributing a large quantity of marijuana and other illegal drugs. In addition, their prior flight from the jurisdiction, while still involved in legal proceedings, could expose them to further charges if they are found to have violated earlier court orders. All of these details are currently being compiled into the case file, pending review at the formal trial stage. Procedurally, the defendants will first move through preliminary prosecution steps as required. Prosecutors in Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish will likely present the case to a grand jury to review and issue formal indictments for each person. Given the volume of evidence already collected, from illegal drugs and cash to firearm, meeting the threshold for indictment is expected to face few obstacles. As for sentencing exposure, if convicted, the defendants could face very severe penalties under Louisiana law. The large quantity of marijuana alone could result in sentences measured in decades. Synthetic drugs such as MDMA, methamphetamine, and ketamine are strictly controlled, with penalties that may reach 15 to 30 years in prison for each distribution-related offense, depending on the specific weight involved. In addition, carrying weapons in connection with drug offenses can add multiple years to the punishment. If the court chooses to impose consecutive sentences for each charge, the total sentencing exposure for the defendants could become especially harsh. Beyond possible prison terms, the defendants would likely face asset forfeiture for property tied to illegal activity. The roughly $135,000 in cash, 3 gold bars, and 3 luxury vehicles already seized will be considered for permanent forfeiture if the court finds they were directly connected to drug trafficking. Moreover, other assets, such as homes or bank accounts, could also be subject to forfeiture if prosecutors can prove they were linked to these transactions. As of now, all 4 defendants remain in custody awaiting trial, while the investigation continues in order to clarify every link in the network. A spokesperson for the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office said that the possibility of expanding the case is still under consideration. If new leads are uncovered, such as the drug supply source or additional accomplices, the list of defendants and charges could be expanded. At the same time, federal prosecutors are closely watching developments. If they decide to get involved, the case could be elevated to the federal level, where penalties may be more severe. However, at this time, the case remains under the jurisdiction of the state of Louisiana. In the coming weeks, preliminary hearings are expected to take place one after another. If the defendants do not accept responsibility, the trial process could stretch on for months, or even longer, due to the case's complexity and the large volume of evidence. Public attention in New Orleans, along with the local Vietnamese community, is expected to keep following every development closely. The case involving Tony Trun and his accomplices is not merely a drug investigation. It has also become a major scandal that has shaken public trust in the local law enforcement system. The most shocking focus is Tony Trun himself, a lawyer and former assistant district attorney, someone who once represented justice, now accused of playing a key role in a large-scale distribution network. This fall from grace has sparked anger and disappointment, because when someone who once stood in the position of upholding the law goes off course, the consequences do not stop with the individual, they directly damage the credibility of the entire justice system. That afternoon at a secondary school in Canberra, everything began like a mysterious accident. During class, a 15-year-old female student suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed onto the classroom floor. As she slipped into a semi-conscious state with dilated pupils, teachers and classmates were thrown into panic. An ambulance was called immediately. Upon arrival, paramedics determined that this was not an ordinary fainting episode, but rather that the victim had likely consumed an unknown substance. She was quickly transported to the hospital in a state of fluctuating consciousness. There, doctors detected THC, the primary active compound found in a prohibited plant in her system, at an unusually high concentration. The only clue at that point was the girl's fragmented account of having eaten 2 green gummy candies offered to her earlier by a friend. Notably, the gummies had a playful appearance but carried a slightly bitter fruit flavor. This detail led medical staff to suspect that the candy had been infused with stimulants. The hospital promptly notified authorities as the case suggested that illegal substances had infiltrated the school environment. Shortly afterward, police summoned the 12-year-old friend who had directly given the candy to the victim for questioning in the presence of her parents. Initially, the girl appeared frightened and confused, firmly denying involvement out of fear of consequences. This became the first obstacle in the investigation, as the key witness was reluctant to cooperate. However, through careful psychological approaches, investigators reassured the child that their goal was to identify the individual distributing the substances, not to punish minors. Encouraged by her mother, the girl gradually provided valuable information. She admitted that the stimulant-infused gummies and cookies had been purchased from an unfamiliar man. Notably, she had met him in person for transactions at least twice before. Based on the witness's account, the suspect's profile began to take shape. He was described as a young Asian man in his early 20s, fluent in English, who often arranged to meet customers at locations near schools. He drove a blue vehicle, used aliases, and communicated online under the nickname No Names. Initially, the investigation faced significant obstacles due to the lack of concrete information about the distributor's identity. The 12-year-old girl, caught between fear and guilt, could only provide a vague description of the suspect's appearance and vehicle. A breakthrough came from internal records. A senior investigator recalled an incident from the previous year. In 2023, authorities had stopped a vehicle and confiscated approximately 250 illegal e-cigarettes. The driver at that time was a 23-year-old Vietnamese man named Phuc Tran. His physical characteristics and age closely matched the description of the mysterious candy seller. Could it be that just 1 year after that arrest, he had escalated to selling illegal substances to students? This hypothesis was immediately discussed within the investigative team. Upon reviewing records, they uncovered another notable detail. In early 2024, Phuc Tran had once again come to the attention of authorities. On one evening, patrol officers detected the smell of an unusual herbal substance emanating from a blue Hyundai Elantra he was driving. A search of the vehicle led to the seizure of approximately 149 e-cigarettes, multiple packages of prohibited herbal substances, several Suboxone strips, and 4,000 Australian dollars in cash. Significantly, while officers were searching the car, Phuc's phone received a text message containing coded language inquiring about illegal products. Although he was detained at the time, he was later released on bail, while his phone was confiscated for further investigation. A review of his bank statements from the preceding months revealed dozens of small transfers ranging from 44 to 45 Australian dollars each. Many transaction descriptions contain slang referring to stimulants, sweets, or coded terms associated with illicit goods, with some even including messages of thanks. When cross-checking the identities of the senders, authorities were stunned to discover that many of the names belonged to underage students. This was clear evidence of an active network supplying e-cigarettes and illegal substances to minors, with Phuc Tran directly involved. Once sufficient grounds for suspicion had been established, police immediately launched a covert investigation to gather concrete evidence. The surveillance team was divided into two units, one tasked with tracking Phuc Tran's movements, and the other focused on analyzing digital evidence from his phone and bank accounts. Initial findings suggested that Phuc Tran was operating under what is commonly known as a dial-a-dealer model. In simple terms, the distributor works on a mobile basis. Customers send a message to place an order, and he drives to deliver it directly to them, much like an express delivery service. Phuc chose Snapchat to communicate with customers because of its auto-deleting message feature. He also used the anonymous account No Names to avoid being traced. This sophisticated method allowed him to avoid gathering at cafes or fixed transaction points, thereby minimizing the risk of detection by patrol officers. Within just 3 days of continuous surveillance, police recorded approximately 150 transactions conducted by Phuc. The number was staggering. Notably, most of his customers were teenagers, still wearing school uniforms, some as young as 13 or 14 years old. This perfectly aligned with the bank transfer data previously obtained by investigators. Now, detectives had witnessed the illegal activity unfolding in broad daylight. Evidence collection during this phase was carried out with extreme caution. Police decided not to immediately arrest the individual student buyers to avoid alerting the wider network. Instead, they discreetly recorded video footage and took photographs from a distance to strengthen the case file. Each time Phuc stopped his vehicle for a transaction, officers documented the exact time, location, and identifying features of the buyer. Once sufficient evidence had been secured, police swiftly applied for court warrants to conduct urgent searches of Phuc Trun's vehicle and residence. After days of surveillance, they decided to move in. As soon as a group of students walked away from his car, officers surrounded the vehicle and ordered the suspect to surrender. With no opportunity to destroy evidence or flee, Phuc Trun was restrained in the driver's seat. A preliminary search of the vehicle led to the seizure of 51 e-cigarettes of various flavors stored in cardboard boxes, along with 1,000 Australian dollars in cash hidden under the seat. More seriously, police discovered approximately 68 grams of dried prohibited herbal material packaged in small bags and 110 grams of blue liquid stored in bottles believed to be an illicit concentrate used to infuse the gummies. At the same time, another investigative unit executed a search warrant at Phuc Trun's rented home in Franklin, believed to be the production base. What they found inside the modest two-bedroom house shocked even the most seasoned detectives. In the living room, police uncovered 2 professionally installed grow tents containing 9 tall prohibited plants thriving under cultivation. Nearby, metal racks were lined with hundreds of colorful gummy candies shaped like leaves and small bears left out to dry. In the kitchen area, a slow cooker was operating, containing approximately 4 liters of dark blue liquid emitting a strong, distinctive odor. Scattered around it were numerous silicone molds, bottles of concentrated oils, and processing tools coated with sticky plant resin. In the bedroom, authorities seized nearly 600 e-cigarettes, along with approximately half a kilogram of dried, prohibited herbal material already packaged. Together, the findings painted a picture of a closed production chain from cultivation and extraction to processing and packaging of finished products. The forensic examination was carried out meticulously. Approximately 800 assorted gummy candies were sealed as evidence. Preliminary analysis showed they contained extremely high levels of addictive active compounds, explaining why the 15-year-old girl fell into critical condition after consuming just 2 pieces. In addition, police discovered hundreds of cookies and pastries suspected of being infused with illegal substances. Notably, on Phuc's desk, officers found an expense ledger and a money counting machine. Based on this data, authorities estimated that his revenue could have reached hundreds of thousands of Australian dollars. In fact, upon reviewing Phuc's bank accounts, police confirmed deposits totaling 181,000 Australian dollars, believed to be illicit profits accumulated during his operations. This substantial figure demonstrated the scale his distribution network had reached. After Phuc Trun was taken into custody, police expanded the investigation by summoning the parents of students whose names appeared in the bank transfer records. A total of 14 teenagers agreed to provide statements. They admitted to having purchased e-cigarettes or stimulant-infused gummies through a Snapchat account under the alias No Names, which was linked to Phuc Trun. These testimonies further strengthened the case file and highlighted the serious impact of his actions on the community. Once the initial case file was completed, Phuc Trun was formally charged with 12 serious offenses. The charges included supplying illegal substances to minors, trafficking prohibited herbal material in commercial quantities, possessing controlled substances, and violating federal laws related to e-cigarettes. Notably, he became the first individual in the Australian Capital Territory to be prosecuted under newly enacted legislation prohibiting the unlawful supply of e-cigarettes outside the regulated pharmacy system. According to investigative findings, Phuc Trun was born in 2000 and was an international student from Vietnam. Based on his statements and immigration records, he arrived in Australia around 2019 to 2020 on a student visa to attend a college in Canberra. Prior to his involvement in criminal activity, his record was clean, with no prior convictions in either Vietnam or Australia. It is reported that Phuc's family in Vietnam was not financially well off, yet they made significant sacrifices to support his overseas education with high hopes for his future. In court, Phuc later admitted that he committed the offenses due to financial pressures during his studies. Initially, Phuc's intention may have been to earn extra income by illegally selling e-cigarettes, a product popular among young people and relatively easy to distribute. His arrest in 2023 with 250 illicit vape devices suggested that this may have been his first attempt at venturing into illegal activity. However, after having his goods confiscated and receiving a warning, instead of reconsidering, Phuc chose to delve deeper into criminal conduct. Psychological assessments indicated that Phuc showed no signs of substance dependency or mental health disorders. His actions were purely profit-driven. In fact, the way he organized operations and carefully planned his activities demonstrated a calculated and methodical mindset. He skillfully used social media for discreet promotion, creating visually appealing products with playful shapes to attract underage customers. At the same time, he concealed his activities by using an alias and conducting swift transactions. His cold indifference was evident in the fact that he knowingly supplied illegal products to minors despite being fully aware of the severe legal consequences. He exploited the inexperience and vulnerability of children for personal gain. This detail led the judge to conclude that Phuc's conduct was particularly serious and more reprehensible than typical cases of illicit substance distribution. As a result, within just a few short months, Phuc Tran transformed from a student with a promising future into a convicted offender. His student visa was immediately revoked following his arrest, effectively ending his academic journey. His family back home was left shocked and burdened by public scrutiny. Yet perhaps the greatest loss was his integrity. From a young man with the potential to contribute positively to society, Phuc instead chose a path that harmed the very community that had welcomed him. After his arrest, Phuc Tran was remanded in custody awaiting the court's decision on his fate. The case was brought before the ACT Magistrates Court, beginning with a plea hearing in late 2024. Faced with overwhelming and irrefutable evidence, Phuc Tran pleaded guilty to 12 serious charges. The list included supplying illegal substances to minors, trafficking prohibited herbal material in commercial quantities, unlawful possession, and violations of e-cigarette regulations. This move was considered a mitigating factor that could partially reduce his sentence. On June 20th, 2025, the official sentencing hearing took place, drawing significant public attention in Canberra under the presiding judge James Lawton. Appearing in court, Phuc Tran wore a simple shirt, his face visibly gaunt after months in custody. He stood with his head lowered in the dock, quietly listening as the court recounted each of his offenses in detail. In defense of his client, counsel requested the court consider mitigating circumstances. The lawyer argued that the defendant was still very young, a first-time offender, and had shown genuine remorse. Additionally, the pressures of living abroad as an international student, financial hardship, and the lack of family supervision were cited as contributing factors to his misjudgment. Phuc's early guilty plea and previously clean record were presented as grounds for leniency. However, these arguments faced difficulty due to the seriousness of the case, which left both public opinion and the court with little room for sympathy. In delivering the sentence, Judge James Lawton described the case as particularly grave. He emphasized that supplying illegal substances to minors was entirely unacceptable. The judge also noted that this was the first time the new e-cigarette legislation had been applied in the ACT, making the ruling an important precedent within the justice system. Regarding mitigating factors, the judge acknowledged the defendant's early plea, expressions of remorse, and lack of prior convictions. However, he stated plainly that in this case, the objectives of punishment and deterrence outweighed rehabilitation, as the offense was driven purely by personal greed. At the conclusion of the hearing, the court sentenced Phuc Tran to 1 year in prison. The 12-month term was backdated to his arrest in September 2024. This meant that by the time of sentencing, he had already served 8 months and had approximately 4 months remaining. The court set his release date for September 2025. In addition to the custodial sentence, the defendant was fined 7,500 Australian dollars. However, Judge Lawton waived the fine, likely considering that the period of imprisonment was sufficient to serve as a deterrent. The hearing concluded with a solemn message from the presiding judge, who expressed hope that schools and parents would become more vigilant after this incident and that the defendant would use his remaining time in custody to reflect on his wrongdoing. The case of Phuc Tran left a profound impact on Australian society, particularly within the Canberra community. Above all, it served as a stark warning about the alarming reality of illegal substances infiltrating schools under seemingly harmless disguises. Following the incident, Canberra police and school authorities strengthened their coordination, organizing awareness sessions to warn students never to accept food or drinks from strangers or even from friends without knowing their origin. From a legislative and enforcement perspective, this case marked the first time Australia's new e-cigarette prohibition laws were applied in the ACT courts. It demonstrated the government's firm stance against not only traditional illicit substances, but also emerging stimulants such as nicotine-containing e-cigarettes. Phuoc Trun's sentence set a powerful deterrent precedent for similar offenses. After the trial, Australian media outlets such as ABC News and the Canberra Times widely reported on the prison term and financial penalty imposed. The message was clear: short-term profit can cost one's freedom and future. Notably, the case did not end with a single offender. Through expanded investigations, Canberra police discovered that Phuoc Trun was merely one link in a larger network involved in trafficking e-cigarettes and illegal substances. Fortunately, leveraging evidence uncovered from Phuoc's case, ACT police dismantled nearly the entire network. In October and November 2024, authorities arrested additional suspects and seized more than 3 kilograms of substance-infused gummies, 4,000 e-cigarettes, and numerous other valuable exhibits. The community could breathe a sigh of relief knowing that a significant threat had been neutralized. However, the case also underscored that the fight against illicit substances in schools remains challenging and requires coordinated efforts from all sectors. What are your thoughts on the sentence imposed in this case? Share your perspective in the comments below. Thank you for following today's story to the end. If you believe this message should be spread to prevent similar crimes from happening again, please like, share the video, and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files to support us. For now, goodbye, and see you in the next shocking case.